Hi, everyone.
Good
How are
Hey, how's it
you?
going?
Well, hold on one second. I'm going to plug in my microphone here. I think we are all up, and I still see people trickling in. And so for the panelists that are on the call, you might see the Propy logo because I have my Propy team here setting up. We are live streaming to Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter. So we just are getting it all set up. And of course, all of the attendees and the folks that are joining us on this webinar, taking the time to come in and join us today. So thank you so much for joining us on our weekly webinar. My name is Alex Tieu, and I am your host and the COO of Propy. And so we wanted to just welcome everyone and really welcome you to, I'm super excited to talking to our two guests today. And we're talking about international buyers as all the markets start to open up. And, we're seeing a lot of people, as well coming in, and we're seeing an uptick in international buyers. So, so my two guests today, I have with me Lawson, who's the head of Lennar Asia. And if those of you on the call who've never heard of Lennar, I think that's impossible if you're in real estate, right? And we're the largest builders in the United States. And, Steve, a personal friend of mine, and the three of us actually have actually traveled together, believe it or not. And so, Steve, thank you so much for joining. You run an amazing team out there in Asia and all the strategic cells. And I know that, you've been featured in, Forbes and the Wall Street Journal to talk about international buyers. So if anybody knows what's happening with international buyers and how to work with them, it is absolutely going to be Steve. And then also joining me, we had Stephen over, the CEO of the Western region for Douglas Elliman, originally scheduled, but instead he had to travel. And today, thank goodness, I think there's no one better than Richard Jordan, who's the Vice President and Head of Global Markets for Douglas Elliman. I mean, this guy, I've had the pleasure of spending some time with Richard, and believe me, he is such a wealth of information. If you ever wanted to sell, or which country, and you are going to see that today as well. So thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me today on our webinar. And so let's absolutely get started. We have so many, and for the audience, before I get started with our little discussion here, if you have any questions, feel free. There's a chat box and there's also a question box here. And if you're on social media right now, and if you have a question, our Propy team is actually monitoring the social media. Ask your questions there, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can on this webinar. So, so let's get started. Stephen, can you tell us, a little bit about what you're starting to see, and a little bit of, your journey here at Lennar, and then, tell us what you're starting to see, especially now with this pandemic.
Sure. Thanks, Alex. And thank you for inviting me to be here today. It's a pleasure and an honor, and it's great to be working with you and Richard again. We had worked well together in Hong Kong, and it's great to be back. My journey with Lennar actually began in 2011. And Lennar is the largest single-family home builder in the United States, and they had a wish to expand their global presence and to bring more global buyers. And I was already in China, originally back from 2007. And so they asked me to begin to assist them in opening the China market to Lennar. And it's been a great journey. We've built the business up substantially. A lot of years, at the beginning, we doubled sales. Of course, the first year, that number wasn't so huge, but it's a goodly number now. And as far as what I've seen, I definitely have seen in the recent 2 months a bit of what I would call a pause out of China. I'm also responsible for some other markets, Vietnam being one of them. And Vietnam was more steady during that period of time. And my belief, and I don't have anything but 12 and a half years of intuition and I don't have a full data set, is that I think the Chinese buyers were a little bit on the side in the recent 2 months. I think waiting to see if the market would collapse and prices would collapse, and then they would be happy to be a buyer at a lower basis. But I think now that they've seen that the pricing in the market largely has remained stable, I think they want to get back in and try to get some more modest discounts during this period of time, because they're not seeing the wholesale discounting that they were hoping.
Right, right. Well, thank you for that. Is that what you're seeing as well, Richard?
Yes, Alex, thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here, and great to see both of you again. Yeah, it's exactly what we're starting to see. You know, Douglas Elliman obviously has offices in New York, South Florida, LA, and the foreign buyers have sort of taken a pause right now, just given COVID. But what we are starting to find is that select markets are beginning to open up, with mainland China, also Hong Kong, and then another market to really focus on is going to be Seoul. They recently had their elections, and it wasn't really favorable for ultra high net worth clients. So we do expect to see a lot of money moving out of Seoul into the United States for a wide variety of reasons. But it's been relatively quiet, but I would say over the past 2 weeks, we have seen an uptick. I think it's now trying to balance their expectation of where the market is. And one of the great things about the US is its resiliency for price protection, which is why so many foreigners seek the United States, because in times like this, you're not going to have such severe swings in the marketplace that you may see in you know, sort of second tier and tertiary markets around the world. So and you know, to Stephen's point, the prices have, it's a bit too early to tell, right? Because we're not getting as many offers as we were before, but we don't expect there to be significant discounts across the market. And so I think we've just got to meet in the middle there. And I think that as we get through this, as more states open up, and as we get more positive news and get, you know, closer to this idea of a vaccine, that we will start to see activity pick up.
Right. And I'm just curious, how, especially with you, Stephen, what are you seeing in China right now as far as, you know, it sounds like they're recovering or getting back to normal a few months, about a month ahead of the United States. Are you seeing like a difference? What are you hearing from your team there?
Yeah, good question, Alex. I think that China has come back to at least a temporary new normal. People are going outside, people are eating in restaurants, people are shopping, retail is open, but it's all with a little bit of extra caution, and temperature screening and masks are ubiquitous. And I think that that's helpful to go back to a more new normal. In terms of the working new normal, the same holds true as for going into office buildings. Everyone is temperature screened every time they come into a building. But we see teams have basically returned back to work. And we do also see some teams that are continuing to work from home. And I think in the US, we're going to see somewhat similar. I've heard news stories about some companies that are telling employees that are not essentially to be at specific locations that they're going to be able to work from home. And I think from my perspective as someone who's in primarily the single family housing market, I think that this speaks very well to our future.
Right, right. Well, thank you for that. We're always curious, or at least I am always curious. Like, I feel like if there's a group of folks or a country that's gone before us, we're to follow. So learning from that is important. And then with Richard, I actually had, and for the folks that are starting to follow my webinar, you know that typically what we do in these webinars is, you know, we do have a presentation, and I actually looked through, Richard, the screen share that you sent to me, and it is such a wealth of information. Would you mind like going through it? Because I feel like this will answer a lot of people's questions on, you know, some of the questions I have are, what are some of the key selling points right now for overseas buyers? And, you know, what are some of the countries that we should be looking at? So I think if you could take that, Richard, I'll go ahead and share the presentation. Would you mind going through that with us?
Not a problem.
All right, hold on one second, guys. Let's do it right now. So here we go. So look at this. Isn't this just in your face? So tell us about this shot that you wanted about this.
Well, I was just talking to Stephen before we began. Even in the fourth quarter of 2019, the world was really already in turmoil pre-COVID. If you looked at what was happening around Brexit and their decision to leave the EU versus the protests in Hong Kong, the U.S.-China trade war. And so there were signs or great concerns about a global recession coming, which has now been realized. But and now we're looking at the COVID-19 pandemic, and that's obviously sort of slowed the market. But this is sort of just saying the state of global markets around the world. And I think when you're looking for foreign buyers, it's important to know what's going on in each market, because sometimes if there's additional unrest in a market, then you'll find that many ultra high net worth clients are going to look to invest in stable assets in key markets. And then typically they're going to go to prime markets around the world.
Right. So this is more of that. So what
Correct.
happened in Q4?
Well, it's not so much that anything happened in Q4 besides what I just mentioned previously, but there were concerns about a global recession. Hong Kong had gone into a recession. Singapore had gone into a recession. UK was approaching a recession. In fact, the US was actually flying high at the time. We had a 50-year low unemployment rate, that the highest price in the stock market in history. And so, but other markets were already going in a downward trajectory. And then of course, now with COVID, it's kind of pushed us all into this recession. So it's here. Yeah, and then I think that the other key fact, which is really great to know when you're speaking to foreign buyers, there's something that I actually didn't put into the slide, but there's two main points. The most important thing for foreign buyers, especially when they're buying the United States, is about corporate structuring and working with an accountant to make sure that ownership is held in the right way. In the United States, it is the single most important thing to make sure that they own in some form of a corporation or a trust, and that's due to inheritance tax, which is at 60%. Very easy to avoid because corporations, entities do not die. For example, in London, you want to buy in your personal name. So it's the exact opposite of that market. So it's really important that anyone working with foreign buyers has a great relationship with accountants or corporate structuring firms that can help guide their clients, whether or not this is their fifth asset or their first primary residence, or if they're buying on behalf of their children. But the other driver that we have is the level of taxation on foreign purchasers in key markets around the world. So if you can go to the next slide, let's look at a few key markets, which again, foreign buyers typically go to these prime markets in times of uncertainty, because usually they're going to get some sort of deal that you could have never gotten before. But if we look at foreign buyer taxation in the UK, at 1.5 million pounds or more, foreign buyers are taxed 15% stamp duty, and that is now going to be increased by an additional 2%, which I believe is in about 12 to 18 months. I'm not sure the exact date. So that's a pretty heavy number to pay up front in a very mature market, and a close second to the United States with foreign buyer interest. If we look at Singapore, it's 20%. Canada is up to 22%, and then Hong Kong is double taxation at 30%. The United States, 0%. So this is a huge selling point if someone's considering another market, is to say, outside of the strength of the US economy, which is difficult to say right now, but we obviously have to talk about where, how our market was pre-COVID, and then what our government's doing to backstop the losses for us and to help fund us and the security of the banks.
Right.
But then saying, look, you have an opportunity to buy in the United States in a prime market, negotiate a deal. Every market's going to be different. Every developer is going to give a different deal, whether it's some sort of closing cost or whether it's a percentage off the asking price. But you're not going to have to pay a stamp duty. Foreign buyers in the United States pay the same as local buyers.
Mm-hmm. Got it. And this is so interesting because, the three of us we've met each other in Hong Kong. working with foreign buyers like years ago. And what people, I think a lot of folks, especially real estate brokers and agents, need to understand is that when there's a foreign buyer, they're not just considering buying only in the United States. So this information is important because they're looking, if you're sending your kid off to college, you're looking at which country, and it's not necessarily always going to be the United States. So, you know, having this at your disposal and having this information really gives you the tools to show like why you should buy here in the United States as opposed to Canada, Hong Kong, London, or, you know, Canada or anything like that. So I think this is a very important thing.
Right, and if I would just add, those are all great markets, but if we're at this time where everything is being sort of leveled down to some extent, and they're uncertain about how fast each market is going to recover, if you put the additional stamp duty tax as an upfront cost and you compare them, obviously the opportunity is in the United States, and especially if ownership is structured correctly so that you're not paying the inheritance, so you don't have the risk of inheritance tax. And then if you're structured correctly via an accountant, there can be some way to minimize your capital gains exposure. So the U.S. really struggles globally with this, with you know, this idea of taxation and that we're tax heavy. But the reality is, if it's structured correctly, that's simply not true, especially for foreign purchasers, given the stamp duty taxes we're seeing in other key markets around the world.
Right, right. Stephen, I think you run into this a lot, especially with the taxation and seeing why foreign buyers are looking at the United States. So I'm sure you see this as well.
Yeah, I do. And I think Richard's point is extremely relevant. I think that we also talk about the relative strength of the US dollar as the international standard of currency and a great way to preserve assets. And then the other thing that we talk about is that the US is a fully developed economy, like a lot of the other markets that Richard mentioned that have these regression taxes, but we're one of the only developed economies that has a rapidly growing population. And when it speaks to real estate and the supply and demand curve, I think that that's another key advantage to go along with Richard's point, which is super important. And the strength of the US dollar is the fact that we are a growing nation in terms of population. And that's not common among developed economies.
Right. Well, we can, Richard, I think you have a couple more slides you want to go through here. Do you want to go through them now? All right, hold on one second. Let me go ahead and share it here. And, but yeah, then I know that what I want to round up this panel discussion with is that, how to market and how to talk to foreign buyers about what's happening here. Give me a second. Let me go ahead and share, and let's finish this. So here we go. All right.
Yeah, so if we just talk about the strength of the U.S., we've gone through the taxation points and structuring, but if we generally look at the strength of the U.S., you can get to the next slide, Alex.
Sure.
We have a very strong Fed backstop, and the government moved very quickly, approving $2 trillion to date. And there are talks of an additional $3 trillion, which is estimated. So we don't know that just yet. But again, I think that gives a lot of comfort and security. And I think that you have to talk about, look, we're all impacted by COVID. It's not something that we're going to be able to avoid. New York City is a prime market of mine that I focus on. Obviously, we've been impacted very heavily. But again, there's security in the fact that our economy was incredibly strong before. And again, prior to COVID, the stock market was at all-time highs. But it's interesting to see that, when we saw about a 35% reduction in the market, we've now moved back up at about, or now we're only down at about 15% off of all-time highs. So we've rebounded already at Q2 sort of 2019 levels. Whether or not that's going to stay there is going to depend on what we continue to see as people go back to work. But again, it speaks to the strength of the U.S. and sort of investor sentiment long term. Now, 50% of our foreign buyers, 50 or 60 of them, are buying for their children. And a significant driver is going to be education. And the United States has 8 of the top 10 universities in the world, some within California, some in the Northeast, but that's obviously going to be a major driver.
Okay.
Many people are not aware, but the U.S. is the #1 market globally for foreign investment into property, and specifically into residential property. Foreign buyers only make up about 10% of the U.S. buyer base. We've seen that go down just a slight bit, but I believe that we could potentially see those numbers come back up to the 10% levels, potentially increase, depending on how other economies are doing. And if we continue to sort of come out of this on top, again, seeing opportunity to either directly invest in the US because of COVID and the impact of COVID, and developers willing to negotiate, we could see an increase in foreign buyers over the next 3 or 4 years.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you for that. I think there's a lot of folks that if you're starting to work with foreign buyers, it's really, listen, summer's coming up and school's beginning, right? And so if there's ever a time, especially right now, where, we're really giving you this information where, what was it, 50% of foreign buyers are usually buying because of education. And so I think that, this is the time to actually start gearing up rather than, looking at that, and having that information is significant. And so, Stephen, what are some of the things when you've run markets, in these countries and talking to and selling, like, how are you marketing and, how are you building that marketplace for foreign buyers? What are you doing and what are your teams doing?
Yeah. Well, there certainly was a habit in the past of a lot of offline events, and today the offline events have not yet come back. But I mean, certainly the webinar, the live stream and digital media are the ways in which we're engaging with potential customers. And that takes the form of one-on-one live tours and interactions. That takes the form of larger events, and some of the live streaming events that we've done have had hundreds of people involved, and then thousands of people who have seen them thereafter. So I would say that that's definitely the new normal. And I think that everything has to be country sensitive. Everything has to be country specific. We approach buyers in each country with a sensitivity towards that country. It's more than language. And I think that for people that are beginning, I think that they need to pick a target country and really start to try to deeply understand the population that they're working with, and understand that culture permeates thinking. It's not just language. So it's something that takes time, but I think is worthwhile for people to do.
So I have a bunch of questions that are starting to come in on the social media that I see here. First, and I'll let you, Stephen, since you're talking about it, what are the strongest markets in the U.S. for foreign buyers right now? And do you see any changes being observed in 2020 at this point?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that, no, we don't have any 2020 trends that have changed things. I coined a phrase, Cali-NY-itis, which has been around a lot longer than COVID-19. And that is the belief by foreign buyers that we are not the United States of America, we are the United States of California and New York. And, I know that definitely bodes well for our partners in New York, like Richard. So I think that if you're participating in those two markets, you have an advantage already. Having said that, we definitely see foreign buying activity in other markets, including Seattle, Washington State, Las Vegas, all of the large cities in Texas, all throughout Florida, Georgia, the Carolinas, and up the eastern seaboard. So while we don't necessarily see a lot of activity in the Central Plains, we see a lot of activity in what I call the Smile, basically starting in the Upper West going down through the South and going up the East Coast. I think that those are the markets that at least the buyers that I work with in Asia are most interested in.
Yes. And how will Chinese investors exiting Hong Kong and investing more in the US?
Richard, do you want to comment on that, or?
Yeah, I think that Chinese investors, the United States has been their primary market, but historically have been investing all over the world. But I think that their number one market is the United States. I think that the current rhetoric and dialogue around the U.S.-China trade war is giving some pause. But at the end of the day, I think with any high net worth client, whether it's someone from China, they want to put their money in safe haven destinations. And typically, to Stephen's point, that's why they go to prime markets like New York or LA. Once they come into these markets and then they start to say, oh, we've got a great portfolio in Houston. We've got products starting from $400,000. So sometimes it's about what price product they can achieve and sort of what those numbers look in the overall economy. But we have seen a slowdown in Chinese buyers. I think 3 years ago, we were probably around the peak, but we still have a steady influx of buyers coming from China. But to Stephen's point, they're mostly focused in these gateway cities. That's just where they feel most comfortable. And sort of surrounding those gateway cities are, typically where the top universities are. So whether that's around San Francisco, near LA, or around New York and Boston.
Right, got it. Well, I have, Stephen, I know you have some tips that you like to leave with the audience here on, how to market and scale and, what you've done here at Lennar. I'm actually going to pull that up real quick and want to have you review that. Give me 1 second here. So this is Richard's presentation. There we go. So. Sorry, there was more. There we go. So Steve, some of the observations that you've had. So in working with foreign buyers, can you just, I know this is a lot, and for the audience, we're going to be sending this to everybody who's registered for the webinar, all these slides. So, so you don't have to read everything, but if you can give us some tips that you see, Stephen, to brokers and agents that are working with foreign buyers, some of the things that you see here.
Sure. I do think that branding matters. I think that we have a great brand, and I think that that resonates with foreign buyers. I think that from the brokerage community, a brand like Elliman and Knight Frank is another thing that gives a lot of confidence. I think that you have to speak the language of investing. You have to speak to things like global asset allocation. But I think when you talk about it at the one-to-one level, you have to reduce it down to concepts like not keeping your eggs all in one basket. And I spoke to Calianwyitis. I think that if you're in California or New York, it's a great advantage. But to Richard's point, places like Houston have great investment opportunities, but they can be accessed in price points that we can't achieve in New York or California. So I think that that's important. I think that we have to speak to the strength of the US dollar and the fact that we don't have regression taxes like we talked about earlier as being, very important. I think that these are some of the key points that have helped us to be successful in the markets in which we are working.
Got it. So, I mean, and that's why I think, Richard, you're so successful with Douglas Elliman and really speaking the language of foreign investors. So, I completely agree. And I think, being able to talk intelligently about those things are always going to, give people a step up. You want me to switch to the next one, Stephen?
Sure. Yeah, on the when Richard was speaking to that, we are always working with foreign investors who have other choices. And since Lennar only works as a home builder in the United States, we are obviously vested in sending the right messages about the US. We definitely have had a incredibly strong economy and employment pre-COVID-19. I believe personally that we will recover, and we're seeing the evidence both in the equities market and in other markets. And I think that we continue to be a great choice. I think that I've heard some buzz about healthcare quality countries, that at least in the Asian investors, they were in the recent years looking at opportunities in places like Cambodia, Phnom Penh. And I wonder whether that can continue, or whether they will choose higher quality destinations based on healthcare capacity, as an example. So I think that just some of these things which we touched on earlier are, we've already discussed a little bit. And then this is number 7 is just my opinion. I believe that single family is going to be a very strong asset class moving forward because of the impact of COVID-19, because of it being favorable with both owners and renters. And some other voices in the housing industry, like John Burns, is speaking about this also. That's not to say that cities like New York are not going to continue to be prosperous. It's just to say that in other markets, I think that people are going to continue to favor lower density housing to higher density housing.
Would you agree with that, Richard? I mean, when I saw Stephen say that, single family homes are probably, at least in the near future, going to be outselling, higher density products like condos, for example, just because of what's happening and the social distancing that's happening.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to say. I think Stephen's definitely right that there's going to be an uptick in single family housing purchases. We've already started to see that in New York City, whether, individual clients were deciding to either rent or buy in the Hamptons or upstate New York or around Connecticut, or even all the way down into Miami. And so there's definitely going to be an increase in single family buyers. But if we look sort of into the future, let's look into the past too. Let's look at a market like New York, where if you look at every major crisis that has occurred in, whether global or local to the United States, New York has recovered incredibly quickly, right? So 2008, 2009, New York City recovered in 5 quarters. Only London beat that. They started to recover in 4 quarters. So there's investment opportunity there, and it's New York City. So I'm not concerned about their ability to come back, but these developers are going to have to think differently and think, really center their developments around lifestyle and wellness. Whether that's incorporating a company like Delos for air quality control, touchless devices, that's going to be a thing of the future. And so I think it's going to be a combination of the two. I do have confidence that New York will recover. To keep in mind, I believe the stat is, there's roughly 50% of the world's population lives in city centers. And by 2050, 70% of the world's population will live in city centers. And so what is that going to be? I don't know. Are we going to be building cities just outside of other major cities that have a different lifestyle component to it? But prime markets will certainly come back as well. So I think it's a combination of the two.
Right. Well, this actually segues. I'm glad that you talked about a little bit about technology, and for the folks that are on the call, just a reminder, we're, we also have Lennar on the phone. They're not only a panelist on not on the phone on this webinar, but they're not only a panelist, but Steve and I actually work together because Propy is building out the Lennar platform for the international cross-border. So that inventory can be easily executed contracts, and it's done on the Propy platform. And so, so it's a little bit of a, really cherry on top, having not only Lennar on this webinar, but then also talking about international buyers and what we're doing. And we're going to show anybody who wants, we're going to actually show a little bit of that demo after this, so that I don't keep both my panelists on this webinar for too long, so that we can get through all your questions. But if you're interested in seeing how technology, or some of the groundbreaking technology that we're all actually working together on, and Stephen, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about it, but right now we're working with your Chinese team, or with your team over in China, where they can get inventory and executed contracts easily through the Propy platform.
Yeah, well, I think from that particular project, I think that the transactional aspect is what excites me personally the most. As I shared with you, our company name is Lennar, but your process is very linear. And I think that it's helpful for us, particularly in doing our foreign national transactions, to be working with you on a system that will keep everyone operating in a linear fashion. And I wasn't early to that project, but it was great to see it begin to flourish. And as someone who's been doing it, we'll call it the old-fashioned way, or originally since 2007, I'm happy to see that as a move to add lubricity to the second part of the transaction. And we're working on a lot of things to add lubricity to the early part of the transaction. So when we add those together, we hope that it will increase the speed at which we can do a transaction from start to finish.
Right. And I say, and I think Richard, you would agree, like a transaction, once you get, like any sell, you have to get the contract signed. You got to get the deposit in, or else you have no sell. And what Propy, I think, when we talk about doing it linearly, is basically getting those steps done super quickly with no, firewall issues or things like that. And so I think that is, and having that transparency and communication between the developer and the partner agent or whoever it is on the other side. And so thank you for that. And for, like I said, we are actually launching our consumer interface for the folks that are listening. So we'll be doing a demo on that at the end. I do have a couple of questions here. So I have a question from James. Any consideration for new development versus resale for international buyers? I would believe that foreign buyers will be more interested in new, never lived in versus resale, simply due to what they are experiencing today. What do you think?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that if we look again at some of the prime markets that were positioned in the United States, I think that the greater opportunity is actually going to be negotiating directly with developers that maybe were 60% sold or 50% sold. Their banks are giving them a little bit of pressure, and they need to start moving inventory. If you go to resales, then it's just down to the individual and sort of their personal situation. And oftentimes, again, why foreigners like to invest in prime markets is if the market's tough and they're not getting the price they want, they're going to rent it. And we're starting to see that now across New York is, look, we're just going to put a tenant in it. We'll wait a year to 18 months. And so I think you're going to have a harder time negotiating, excluding certain circumstances on resale, and a much easier time going direct to new build product, just because they have a lot more flexibility on closing cost or on price.
Okay, so here's the last question, and we're going to have to wrap pretty soon. Is Richard, can you share some examples of what's happening in New York's real estate and international buyers and statistics in the past year? Like, have you seen more foreign buyers in the past year in New York City?
Yeah, in New York City, the foreign buyers make up about around 12 to 15% of the overall market. I think for the past few months during COVID, obviously New York has been, completely shut down. So we don't have any real statistics for that. I can tell you that foreign buyers are now calling me, but of course looking for discounts that, some reasonable, most are unreasonable. And so it's about educating them on where the market is, and going back and looking at the history of the market, and even in the global financial crisis, what percentage the market went down as a whole. So it takes a lot of education with foreign buyers, but typically foreign buyers went towards new development. So in some new development product, you would see a greater percentage of foreign buyers in a particular building. It could range anywhere from 5% all the way up to 40, and in some cases 50%. But again, in New York City, it's usually about 15% of the overall market are foreign buyers. But it's been a steady stream. It just seems to change where they're coming from. It was Russians before it was the Chinese. Chinese seem to be shifting off. I think a market really to be focusing on for the future is going to be Seoul, because they have a great affinity to the US. And again, based on the most recent election that occurred a month ago, I think that we'll have a lot of money moved from that market. And also looking in targeting specific foreign markets, it's really important to think about who do they have the greatest sort of affinity for, which market, right? Hong Kong typically gravitates to the UK. The US is their secondary market, but places like Taipei, Taiwan, they prefer the US. Seoul, Korea prefers the US. And so we're trying to stay as focused as we can on these markets where we know that foreign buyers have a great affinity for the United States. And, you know, we'll have to wait and see what the numbers are going to look like. But I think we've really got to get through COVID to be able to understand that. But we are now, as of a week to 2 weeks ago, seeing an uptick in foreign buyers, but it is minimal right now. Because we're not even really open, so we're doing webinars, but the number of webinars is significant. So
yeah, I know. I'm doing a webinar. We're doing a webinar right now. I know folks are zoomed out, so you know the people are on this call are very dedicated. They want to hear what you're talking about. So so real quick, I'm going to why don't Stephen and Richard, I'm going to have you have any last words and advice here. I'm going to wrap up, and then I'm going to wrap up with the audience, just tell you what's upcoming and what's coming next here. So here you can see we are right after this call, after we wrap up with Stephen and Richard, we're going to do our demo of the consumer interface, where you can, as an agent and broker, you can have your sellers follow along on Propy. It's the first time ever that your sellers can see offers the minute they come in at the same time as you, and give you a crazy control over it, and giving your sellers a very much different experience than they are right now. And then last but not least, these are, you know, our past webinars that we've done. So if you are interested, because we get this a lot, in getting some of these webinars emailed to you, let us know. The first one that we had was with Josh Harley, who is the CEO of Phantom Real Estate, 4,400 agents that has been in the past decade completely virtual, that he has grown this brokerage on. So we learned so much from him. You should listen to him. Then we also had Tammy Bonnell, CEO of Exit, and Rob Hahn, the notorious ROB, who was all talking about finance, and what you should be looking at on your P&Ls during this pandemic. And if you are an indie broker, you are not going to want to, you're going to want to listen to Jackie Soto and Courtney, which are both indie, but both of them have probably put in contract between the two of them since COVID happened, 100 buy-side contracts, and they talk about how they're doing it. And then, you know, marketing with social media, Kenny Trung and Katie Lance. And of course, if you are running or if you are a broker, you do not want to miss Mauricio at the agency. He talked about an hour, you know, for about 30 minutes on what they're doing and what they're doing to clean house. And then lastly, Sherry and John Arrow. Sherry, the CEO of Realogy Expansion Brands, she was on our webinar, and John Arrow, who's just a legend, talk about leadership and what they've seen in every single downturn, and what you should be telling every single one of your agents and brokers so that they can stay motivated and ready to really take off when this thing closes. So we are going, so those are the webinars that we have yet. And then of course, you also have this one with Richard and Stephen about international buyers, which is just a wealth of information. So feel free to email us. I am actually going to ask Richard and Stephen for your last words, any advice you want to give to our listeners as we wrap this up. Who wants to go first?
Go ahead, Stephen.
Okay, fair enough. I think I don't have anything to say other than we should stay the course. Foreign buyers are a meaningful part of this market. And I think that there has been a little pause, but I think as we recover as a country, these buyers are going to be back in the same proportions, I hope, as they were before. I think be sensitive to their needs as buyers, both in terms of how you serve them and how you craft your messaging. And do pay attention to brand. It's important. And absolutely, new construction has always been the favorite of buyers from Asian markets. And I think that both in single family and in high quality, sensitive multifamily is going to continue to be the Asian investors' opportunity of choice in America.
Thank you. Wise words. Empathetic, no matter if it's a foreign buyer, because the COVID hit every single country. Thank you.
Yeah,
Richard.
yeah, and I would agree with everything Stephen has said. You know, I think when dealing with foreign buyers, again, of course, knowing your audience, but I also think that it's really important to tell your story. And fortunately for us with the U.S., excluding COVID, but all other facts about the U.S., given the strength of the economy prior to COVID, which I've mentioned before, sort of our backstop from the Fed. Is that and given the global taxation, we're sitting in a great place, and the narrative is a positive narrative, and there's a limited sort of period of time where buyers are going to be able to come in and again potentially get a better deal than what they could have gotten 3 months ago. So, and then aside from that, you know, arm yourself with the right team. Foreign buyers take more time than a domestic purchaser who already understands the market and understands the neighborhood, understands taxation. So it's important for you to have a great financial advisor, accountant that you work with, your great lenders that you work with, property management teams that you work with, and of course using technology, because you know it's not if, it's just when. And real estate's always sort of lagged in the evolution of technology. So I think, you know, using these resources on your listings, whether it's virtual tours, there's a lot of platforms out there. Obviously, Propy's doing a great job on the contract side and executing deals. So you know, I think that would be my advice, and just be confident on the U.S. market and realize that we're established and we're very transparent. Many foreign markets lack transparency. And so I think the opportunity is now, and start crafting the message and start building your team. The one other thing that I would add is, if you are, you know, going after specific markets internationally, is also, you know, if you're not fortunate enough to have a team like Lennar that you work with, or someone like Knight Frank that we work with that has teams in the local market, find trusted agents in that market. Be willing to share the co-broke commission on your deals, because if a buyer has questions and they're sitting in Taipei, it's going to be very difficult for you to give them the attention they need. And if you have a local partner that you can work with to meet them in person, to create some comfort, I think that'll go a long way.
Right. And if you need to have a partner, join Douglas Elliman or you know, because you guys just have incredible information when it comes to foreign buyers. And, you know, of course, Lennar, I know that both of these guys, you can reach out to them. I'm sure that their networks are humongous. So, so thank you so much. We're going to look at everybody saying thank you, great information. I'm seeing like it on my ticker here. So you guys have some fans here. So thank you so much for joining. We're going to say goodbye, and you know, we're going to continue to deliver these weekly webinars, and you know, of course, let us know what you think and give us some suggestions, as you know, the suggestions always help us make better webinars. And you know, we'll stay on for any folks who want to stay for the demo of what we're doing on Propy's offer management and with our consumer interface. So thank you so much. The two of you have already seen it already, so I don't want to keep you on the call. So thank you so much, Stephen and Richard, and I know you both on the East Coast. So thanks for staying late and giving us amazing information. So for the folks that are on the call, give me 1 minute. We're gonna, you know, turn this around and start doing the demo. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank
All right,
you,
bye.
Alex.
See you,
Thanks,
Stephen.
Richard. Take care.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay. All right, guys. So the folks that are staying here on this, I am actually going to change my screen, and please feel free. You can ask questions. I'm going to start doing a quick demo for you here, and let me just change my screen real quick, and then we can get into it. So what I'm going to do is, there we go. All right, so we're going to do a quick demo of Propy. And so what Propy is that we have three different, I'm going to open this up so you can see my big screen here. And of course, please ask any questions as we get through this. And then we'll turn on your mic so that you can ask the questions, or if you don't want to turn on your mic or video, go ahead and ask it in the chat and I'll get to as many of those questions as I can. So what Propy is, and we talked a little bit about it on the Lennar, on the foreign buyer calls, is that we have three main products: our offer management product, our consumer interface product, and our transaction management product. And what I'm going to do is really concentrate on the offer management and the consumer interface product here. And the offer management is nothing like you've ever seen before, because this is everything that organizes your offer before you actually accept a contract. So let's just go through and see what I'm talking about. So offer management starts where all offers start, right? This is where your private remarks are. Instead of saying, please send all your offers to this email address, it will say, please send all your offers to this URL. The buyer's agent clicks on the URL and they go in and they can put an offer direct to the listing agent in a form that looks like this. And so this is everything from finance type, contingencies, to appraisal, to home warranty. And here, the brokers love this section. This is your preferred services. If you have a preferred service, you can make it as a drop down here so that in a multiple counteroffer, the buyer's agent can pick it. You attach a contract here or your pre-approval letter, and you submit it to the listing agent. It automatically, the system automatically summarizes the offer, and you can then go and review it, review your contract, make sure everything's in order, and finally you submit this to the listing agent. So once the listing agent receives the offer, they get the summary automatically sent to them. And there are three things they can do with this offer. They can accept the offer, counter the offer, or reject the offer. And of course, what you will see here is that everything's summarized and organized. But really the power of Propy is the next step here, which is the consumer interface. What that means is that when you go and you're reviewing offers, let's say as a listing agent, you receive 10 offers on a single property. And what happens is that this dashboard automatically categorizes who the buyer is, the status of each offer, what's submitted, purchase price, so that, if I know so many agents and brokers, you basically get rid of all of the spreadsheets that you typically would have had to put together. And then the most powerful thing is the share button here. And so for the first time ever, you can actually share this dashboard with your seller so that they can see the offers coming in at the same time as you. And so that is our offer management and our consumer interface and what you can share. And when you press on these three little buttons, what you're going to see then is you're going to see a summary of the offer. You're going to see the offer and the contract and be able to review and counter. And of course, once you accept an offer, the system's going to ask you if you're going to convert this into a Propy transaction management. Now, I'm not going to go through it here, but what it does is that it sends all this into transaction management with all of your contingency dates and all those terms, so it makes it easier for your transaction coordinator. So my goodness, I have 19, I said most people stayed for the demo. That's great. So here, if you have any questions, please ask me as well here. You can do it in the chat, or I am actually going to turn on, unmute the audio so that if anybody has any questions, they can ask it here as well. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, I don't think so. I think Ben, thank you for the compliment, Ben. It's really great. And also, thank you for the compliment, Jason. Okay, Louis, how will the buyer know the process of filling out the offer? So it's pretty self-explanatory. You would go into the system, it would say make an offer, and you would fill it out and attach the contract. We've had agents on the system, and so for the most part, they give a quick instruction please, click on this link and fill out the offer and attach your contract. That's simply the instruction that is given when they click on the MLS link. So it makes it really, really easy. And then once the offer is sent, you get a confirmation that your offer has been accepted or submitted, or confirmed the submission to the listing agent, which is way more than most people are getting now. Hold on, there's another question. Okay. Any other questions? Let's see. All right. So I see another question here for preferred services. Would you be able to put any preferred services, and could the buyer's agent pick their own preferred service? And the answer is yes. You can, as a buyer's agent, you don't have to pick the listing agent's preferred service, but the reality is that if you are in a multiple counteroffer, you're likely going to go with what the listing agent recommends. So it does a couple of things. It's great for the listing agent. And then the second thing it does is that, it just streamlines everything. So it saves a lot of time. And then another question is, can you share this dashboard more than just your sellers? So the answer is you can actually share this dashboard with whomever you want. The primary person that a lot of people share with is the seller, because you can actually get more business. Sellers love the transparency, because what's the number one complaint of sellers? Which is communication. Here you are going into a listing appointment and being able to show them you, out of all the buyers or agents they could hire, is going to give them real-time updates instantly on offers that are coming in. So, so there's that as well. So yes, you can, and the other thing is that you can actually share this with your TCs. It doesn't limit on who you can share this with. So you can share this with your TCs, for example, as well. And so that makes it really easy. I have another question here. I need a test account. Ben, you're already on it. And I would try to reach out. Yes. So Ben, we have your information. What we can do is we can contact you and get you on a trial for offer management. Super easy. And so leave your email address here and I will make sure we do that. Okay, there's another question here. Do you have a widget where interested buyer could submit an offer through a website after a oh, yes, we are working on that. So Louis, if you are interested in that, and so that you can track your marketing through offer management, we could absolutely do that. So the best thing I would say is please email me or text me, and we can set you up on to talking to one of our reps, and showing you how to do that. And again, we can also get you on an account as well. Okay, any other okay, so, and there's that. So there's that, and widgets. Okay, so I think I answered everything so far. Hold on, there's another question. Oh, Irene, how do we reach Propy? So I'm actually going, I'm gonna type my answer to you, Irene. So I will give you my email address, Irene, and I'm gonna type it here as well. So, and Irene, oh, you're with Douglas Elliman. So I just sent you a answer, and I am sending to you now the email address. So, and Irene, if you can leave me your email address here as well, that would be great. And I can also send you additional information. So thank you so much for your question. Does anyone have any other questions? Okay. Well, Irene, please leave me your email and we can also contact you. Ben, I got yours, and I think I also have Louis as well. Hold on. So how do we, oh, one last question. How do we convince buyer's agents to submit offers there? Oh, so, I mean, you guys, what we found with the agents that we're working with, you know, they're always afraid that buyer's agents are not going to use Propy to do this organization and go back to their old ways of just submitting emails. I'll give you a perfect example. One of our clients, Courtney Pulios, she put a deal together. It was for $1 million in LA. She had 100 offers on this particular listing right before COVID. And she got it in 3 days. It would have been impossible to manage that. And for the most part, you know, the most buyer's agents, when they are competing for a listing, they click and it's so simple. It's easier than an email. And you get a confirmation of your offer, which you do not get on emails, at least not from the listing agent most of the time. So, so the convincing is not that hard. You just say, hey, you want to put an offer on my listing? You gotta, you know, put it through Propy. And we do this all the time. If you think about it, doing it through for, you know, REOs or, you know, all sorts of others. But what this system does is it gives you complete transparency and complete control over this entire digital, you can digitize this process to make the experience better for you, for your clients, and for the agents, and you know, really get a bidding war happening. So, all right. All right, thank you so much. Any other questions here? And here I'll go ahead and stay on for a few minutes to answer, but that concludes our demo and all the questions. And thank you. I just got like 4 or 5 other emails here of people who wants to, you know, look at what we're doing on offers, and we will reach out to you if you leave your email here, and give you a free trial account on offers, and, you know, let you use it. And also would love to hear your feedback. We're, as a company, we're always looking to improving. At the end of the day, definitely always looking to helping agents, but also looking for improvement and looking for good partners. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we will see you on our next webinar.